A sloth, a donkey, and a curious human. Send a prompt and see what they're doing. One hits record with a question on his mind. Two brothers pick it up, see what they find. Corn takes his time, Herman's got the facts. Back and forth, they never hold back. My weird prompts, come on in, that's where we begin. My weird prompts, glad you're here.
This episode was generated using artificial intelligence. Please verify facts.
My Weird Prompts is a community-driven initiative exploring how AI can fuel curiosity and uncover the fascinating ways our world works. GPU compute for this podcast is generously provided by Modal, the AI infrastructure platform that developers love. Modal makes it easy to run AI workloads in the cloud with instant scaling and no infrastructure headaches.
So there's this guy who's essentially standing between the world and a potential military strike on Iran, and I realized I know almost nothing about him. Rafael Grossi, the IAEA Director General. Who is this person? And does he actually have the technical chops to be doing what he's doing?
This is a great one. Daniel's prompt this week is asking exactly that. Grossi's biography, his scientific credentials or lack thereof, how many people the IAEA actually has, and whether the agency can stay apolitical in one of the most politically charged environments on Earth.
By the way, fun fact, today's episode is powered by Xiaomi Mimo V2 Pro. Anyway, Herman Poppleberry, you've been reading about this guy. Walk me through it. Because my mental image was always nuclear physicist in a suit, and I'm starting to think that's wrong.
It's very wrong, and that's actually the most interesting part of this story. Grossi is not a nuclear physicist. He holds a PhD in international relations from the Geneva Graduate Institute, completed in 1997. His entire career has been diplomacy, 40 years of it. He was Argentina's ambassador to Austria. He represented Argentina at the IAEA. He was president-designate of the 2020 NPT Review Conference. The man is a diplomat through and through.
So the person running the International Atomic Energy Agency doesn't have a science background. That feels like hiring someone to run a hospital who's never been to medical school.
That's the knee-jerk reaction, but I think it misses something important. The IAEA's work in Iran isn't primarily scientific, it's diplomatic. The inspections, the negotiations over access, the reporting to the Board of Governors, that's all diplomacy with a technical wrapper. And Grossi's background in international relations and non-proliferation treaties actually gives him a specific kind of credibility. He understands the political architecture that makes the whole system work.
Okay, but here's my pushback. When Grossi sits across from Iranian nuclear scientists and they're talking about centrifuge cascades or uranium enrichment percentages, doesn't he need to understand that at a technical level? Can you really negotiate over something you don't deeply understand?
That's the tension, and it's real. But consider this. Grossi has spent decades immersed in the nuclear file. He was Argentina's representative to the IAEA from 2013 onward. He negotiated aspects of the 2015 JCPOA, and he's been living in this world for over a decade. You don't need a physics PhD to understand enrichment levels and breakout timelines. You need institutional knowledge and the ability to ask the right questions, which he clearly has.
So he's more like a really good project manager who knows enough science to be dangerous, rather than the scientist-in-chief.
That's closer, though I'd say he's more like a skilled surgeon of international agreements. He knows where to cut, where to apply pressure, and when to back off. His 2024 visit to Tehran is a perfect example. He managed to secure temporary access to key nuclear sites that Iran had been blocking for months. That wasn't a scientific achievement, it was pure diplomatic maneuvering.
What did that visit actually look like in practice? Because I'm imagining him just showing up at some facility and asking nicely.
It was far more complex than that. There were months of back-channel negotiations before the visit. Grossi had to thread a needle. Iran wanted concessions on sanctions relief as a precondition for access, and Grossi had to demonstrate that the IAEA's inspection mandate didn't depend on political quid pro quos. He essentially argued that access was a legal obligation under Iran's safeguards agreement, not a bargaining chip. and he won that argument, at least temporarily.
Because it raises the question of what leverage the IAEA actually has. It's not like Grossi can threaten military action. He's not the Security Council. So what's his actual power here?
His power is almost entirely reputational and procedural. The IAEA reports to the Board of Governors, which can refer matters to the UN Security Council. Grossi's reports are the factual basis for everything that follows: sanctions resolutions, diplomatic pressure, even military justification. When he says Iran has enriched uranium to 90% purity, which the IAEA reported in March 2026, that's not just a data point. That's a geopolitical event. Countries make decisions based on that finding.
So his power is essentially the power of the credible witness. He's the guy you can say, I saw it, here's the evidence, and you can trust my methodology.
That credibility depends entirely on the IAEA being perceived as technically rigorous and politically independent. Which brings us to the really thorny question: can it actually maintain that independence?
Before we get there, let's talk about the agency itself. How big is the IAEA? Because I have this image of maybe a few hundred people doing inspections worldwide, and that seems wildly insufficient.
The IAEA has approximately 2,800 staff members globally as of 2026. That includes the headquarters in Vienna, regional offices, safeguard inspectors, technical cooperation staff, and the Nuclear Safety Division. For context, the agency is responsible for safeguards in over 180 countries, so yes, it's stretched thin.
2,800 people monitoring nuclear programs across the entire planet. That's not a lot. How many inspectors does the Iran file alone require?
The exact numbers are classified, but we know the Iran Safeguards team is one of the agency's largest single-country operations. They're monitoring multiple enrichment facilities, a heavy water reactor, various research sites, and a network of declared and undeclared locations. Each inspection requires trained personnel, secure communications, and the ability to verify complex technical claims. It's a massive undertaking with limited resources.
And this is the part that always confused me. The IAEA isn't technically a UN agency, right? Everyone assumes it is, but it's something different.
This is one of the most common misconceptions. The IAEA is an autonomous organization that reports to both the UN General Assembly and the Security Council, but it's not a UN agency in the way UNICEF or the WHO are. It was established independently in 1957 and has its own governing structure, its own budget, and its own mandate. That independence is supposed to insulate it from the political dynamics of the UN.
Supposed to. How well does that actually work in practice?
Poorly, honestly. And here's why. The IAEA's Board of Governors is made up of representatives from 35 member states. Those representatives are appointed by their governments. So you have people sitting on the board whose primary loyalty is to their national interest, not to the IAEA's technical mandate. When the board votes on how to handle Iran, you're not getting a pure scientific assessment. You're getting a political negotiation.
So the very structure designed to keep politics out is inherently political.
It's inescapable. And Grossi has to navigate this constantly. He has to present technical findings in a way that's accurate and defensible, knowing that those findings will be interpreted through political lenses by every member state. When he reports that Iran has accumulated enough enriched uranium for multiple weapons, Russia and China read that differently than the United States and Israel do.
This reminds me of something we covered in episode 1496 about Iran's nuclear breakout timeline. The technical reality and the political interpretation are almost two separate conversations happening simultaneously.
That's exactly the dynamic. And Grossi is uniquely positioned or trapped, depending on your perspective, right in the middle. He has to maintain credibility with Iran to keep inspections going, while also satisfying the board that he's being thorough and not giving Iran a pass. He has to reassure Western nations that the IAEA is catching violations, while not appearing to be their instrument.
That sounds like an impossible job. How does he actually manage it day to day?
From what we can observe, he's adopted a strategy of radical technical transparency. His reports are detailed, specific, and carefully worded. He lets the data speak and avoids editorializing. When he makes public statements, he sticks to what the IAEA can verify and refuses to speculate beyond that boundary. It's a disciplined approach, and it's largely worked to preserve the agency's credibility.
But has it? Because from where I'm sitting, it seems like everyone is angry at the IAEA. Iran accuses it of being a tool of Western intelligence. The US and Israel accuse it of being too lenient. If everyone's mad at you, does that mean you're doing your job right, or does it mean you're failing at everything?
That's the classic dilemma of any neutral institution in a polarized environment. Being attacked by both sides is often cited as evidence of impartiality, but it can also mean you're too weak to be effective. The IAEA's challenge is that its mandate requires Iranian cooperation. Inspections are voluntary. They're legally required under Iran's Safeguards Agreement, but enforcement of that requirement is entirely outside the IAEA's control. If Iran denies access, the IAEA can report the denial, but it can't force its way in.
So the IAEA is essentially the world's most important observer, but it has no enforcement mechanism. It can tell you the house is on fire, but it can't put out the flames.
And that's where the comparison to North Korea becomes instructive. The IAEA faced a similar situation with Pyongyang in the early 2000s. North Korea eventually expelled the inspectors and withdrew from the Non-Proliferation Treaty entirely. The IAEA could do nothing except report what had happened. The enforcement was left to the Security Council, which imposed sanctions that North Korea largely ignored.
Is Iran heading down that same path? Because if the IAEA's reports keep getting more alarming and nothing changes, at what point does the agency's monitoring become performative?
That's the existential question for the IAEA right now. In March 2026, the enrichment levels hit 90%. That's weapons grade. The IAEA confirmed it, reported it, and the world largely continued negotiating. The technical finding didn't automatically trigger enforcement. It became another data point in an ongoing diplomatic process that may or may not lead anywhere.
Which must be incredibly frustrating for someone like Grossi, who spent his career building the institutional framework for exactly this kind of verification. He's done his job, the data is there, and the political system that's supposed to act on it is paralyzed.
I think that frustration is real, and it shows in some of his more pointed public statements. He's been increasingly direct about the gap between what the IAEA finds and what the international community does about it. There's a tension between his role as a neutral technical authority and his obvious concern about where things are heading.
Can we talk about his actual diplomatic style? Because I've seen clips of him in interviews, and he comes across as very measured, almost professorial. Is that deliberate?
Very deliberate. Grossi has cultivated a persona of calm authority. He doesn't grandstand, he doesn't make threats, and he rarely raises his voice. In a world of performative diplomacy, think of the theatrical confrontations at the Security Council. Grossi's restraint is itself a strategy. It signals that the IAEA operates on a different plane, governed by evidence rather than rhetoric.
Though I wonder if that restraint costs him in terms of public attention. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, and Grossi is anything but squeaky.
That's a fair point. The IAEA's findings often don't get the media attention they deserve precisely because they're presented in measured, technical language. A 90% enrichment finding should be front-page news for weeks. Instead, it gets a few days of coverage and then the news cycle moves on. Grossi's professionalism may actually work against the agency's visibility.
So, the very quality that makes him credible, his refusal to sensationalize, also makes him easy to ignore. That's a brutal irony.
It is, and it connects to a broader problem with how the public understands nuclear issues. People respond to crisis narratives and dramatic confrontations. Technical reports about centrifuge efficiency and enrichment percentages don't generate the same emotional response, even when the stakes are infinitely higher.
Let me ask you something that's been nagging at me. Given everything we've discussed, the political pressures, the limited enforcement power, the stretched resources, is the IAEA actually succeeding at its core mission? Or is it providing a veneer of oversight over a system that's fundamentally failing?
That's the hardest question, and I think the honest answer is somewhere in between. The IAEA's monitoring has prevented a worst-case scenario where Iran develops a weapon in complete secrecy. The fact that we know about the 90% enrichment, that we know about the undeclared sites, that we have a timeline of Iran's nuclear evolution, that's entirely due to IAEA verification. Without the agency, we'd be operating in the dark.
So it's succeeding at detection, but failing at prevention.
That's a fair summary. The IAEA can tell you what's happening, but it can't make it stop. Prevention requires political will from member states, and that's been conspicuously absent. The 2015 JCPOA was the closest the international community came to a preventative framework, and it collapsed when the US withdrew in 2018. Since then, it's been a slow-motion escalation that the IAEA has documented in granular detail.
Going back to Grossi personally, he was appointed in December 2019. He's been in this role for over 6 years now. How has he changed the agency, if at all?
His biggest impact has been in expanding the IAEA's visibility and partnerships. He signed agreements with the World Bank and regional development banks to enhance financing for nuclear energy programs. He's pushed for gender balance in the nuclear field. He's made the Director General role more public-facing than his predecessors. Whether that's strategic or just his personality, it's raised the IAEA's profile.
Though I'd argue the profile raising matters most when it comes to Iran, and that's where the visibility is most constrained by political realities.
That's the paradox. The Iran file is where Grossi's leadership is most tested and most consequential, but it's also where his ability to shape outcomes is most limited. He can report, he can negotiate access, he can maintain dialogue, but he can't solve the underlying geopolitical standoff. That's above his pay grade, literally.
So what should our listeners take away from all this? If someone's following the Iran nuclear situation, how should they think about the IAEA and Grossi's role?
First, understand that the IAEA's reports are the most reliable technical information available on Iran's program. When the agency says something, it's been rigorously verified. Don't let political commentary obscure that. The technical findings are solid even if the political response is inadequate. Second, recognize that the IAEA's limitations are structural, not personal. Grossi could be the most brilliant diplomat in history, and he'd still face the same constraints. The agency can monitor and report, but enforcement requires collective political will that doesn't currently exist.
And third, and this is the part that worries me, the gap between detection and action is where danger lives. The IAEA is doing its job. The question is whether anyone is listening.
That connects to something we discussed in episode 1451 about Iran's scientific workforce. The human capital behind Iran's nuclear program isn't going away even if facilities are destroyed. The IAEA's long-term challenge isn't just monitoring current activities, it's tracking the knowledge and expertise that can be reconstituted.
Which makes Grossi's role even more critical going forward. He's not just managing a current crisis, he's maintaining an institutional framework that needs to outlast this particular standoff.
That's the thing people miss. The IAEA isn't just about Iran. It's about establishing the precedent that nuclear programs can be verified and that international institutions can do that work credibly. If the IAEA fails in Iran, the implications extend far beyond the Middle East. Every country with nuclear ambitions will draw conclusions about whether international oversight actually matters.
That's a heavy thought to end on. Let me ask one more thing. Is Grossi likely to get another term? His current mandate runs through what?
He was reappointed for a second term, so he's in place through 2027. The question is whether the Iran situation reaches a resolution, or a crisis, before his term ends. If things escalate further, he'll be remembered as the Director General who documented a nuclear breakout. If diplomacy succeeds, he'll be credited with maintaining the verification framework that made a deal possible.
Either way, he's going to be a significant figure in the history of non-proliferation. Whether that history is triumphant or tragic is still being written.
That's the reality of the moment. The IAEA is doing everything within its power. Whether that's enough depends on forces well beyond Grossi's control.
All right, let's wrap this up. Thanks as always to our producer, Hilbert Flumingtop, and big thanks to Modal for providing the GPU credits that power this show. This has been My Weird Prompts. If you're enjoying the show, a quick review on your podcast app helps us reach new listeners. Until next time.
Take care, everyone.
This episode was generated using Gemini Flash 3. Text-to-speech engine was Chatterbox.
Thanks for listening to our show, My Weird Prompts, where our thoughts go from slow takes to facts on cue. We change and follow through. My Weird Prompts, that's the close from sloth, from man, from long-eared host. My Weird keep weird in my